Hello, this is Herb Puryear from the Logos Center. We're glad you can join us today. I want to talk with you just a few minutes about the most serious thing that's happening in our time. What is going on in this world, and what are the changes that are coming upon us and that we're about to face? I've been studying this since high school. The apocalypse, the revelation, the end of days, so many ways of talking about difficulties that may come upon a people. And what I came across first, and when I was my first sermon in first year in Baylor, was what's called the Olivet Discourse. Jesus gave two chapters, one about what the big changes are. And let me read just a word or two from this. And Jesus answered and said, "Take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and shall deceive many. And you shall hear of wars, of rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places, and these are the beginning of sorrows. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you. You shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall rise and deceive many. And because of iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. He that endures to the end." This is what I want you to have as a commitment to yourself, and always, in whatever the difficulties are, endure to the end. Now, in the Revelation, which is called the apocalypse, or the unveiling, or the disclosure of things to come. And in the beginning of this, the writer says, "Be not afraid of any of the things that you shall suffer." So we will have some challenges. But the ending part of the Revelation deals with two cities, Babylon and Jerusalem. And Babylon, according to Casey, represents the lower self, which must be done away with, and Jerusalem, the higher self. So this is what the lower self in the destruction, Babylon is fallen. This is what happens when Babylon falls. The merchants of these things, which are made rich by this whore of Babylon, shall stand afar off, the fear of her tormented, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city, that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught. And every shipmaster and all the company of ships and sailors, and as many as trade with the seas, cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like unto this great city? And they cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city, wherein all were made rich. Rejoice over her, heaven, and ye holy apostles, for God hath avenged her. And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone, cast it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more. So the use of all sorts of things that we don't really need in these times, the acquisition of this, that, and the other, which Henry David Thoreau called glow shoes. All of this must come to pass, and the lower self and all of this production of things that have made for the pollution of the oceans, the climate change, the array of change. As I read, there'll be wars and rumors of wars. all of this is coming to a head right now. Just imagine that the oceans are becoming dangerous for whales and fish, that the ice melts are occurring, and the Arctic is warming, and the earth changes, and fires and wildfires and riots in the streets and so on. So what are these times coming to us about? Well, Casey says there will come a time when there will be the coming of the archetype of the archetype of the apocalypse and the archetype of the Antichrist. They asked Casey, in what form does the Antichrist come, spoken to us in the Revelation? And he said, in the spirit that's opposed to the spirit of truth. The fruit of the Spirit of Christ are love, joy, obedience, long-suffering, brotherly love, kindness. Against such there is no law. But the spirit of hate, that's what the Antichrist is about, the spirit of hate. The Antichrist is contention, strife, fault-finding, lovers of self, lovers of praise. Contention, strife, fault-finding, lovers of self, lovers of praise. Well, we're seeing more than enough of that in these times. These are the spirit of the Antichrist, and take possession, get this, take possession of groups, masses, and show themselves even in the lives of men. So this spirit of hate that is deep within all of us and easily aroused is part of what this archetype of the Antichrist is about. Well, I've been reading, and I've called your attention to this book since 2004. I've read it cover to cover 4 or 5 times. It's called Apocalypse of the Archetype, and it's by a Jungian, the major Jungian right under Carl Jung, the major Jungian in this country. And here's what he says about the archetype of the apocalypse. Jung, the most profound psychologist of the modern era, who wrote concerning the symbolism of the world's end, wrote, "The coming of the Antichrist is not just a prophetic prediction, it is an inexorable psychological law." The coming of the Antichrist, not just a prophetic prediction, it is an inexorable psychological law. Now, what this book about, the archetype, and most of it is interpreting all the verses of the Revelation, but this is about what these coming changes may be like. Jung, for example, says, in a dark note, the problems with the integration of the unconscious sets modern doctors and psychologists only solved along the lines of history and the upshot of a new assimilation. Naturally, the present tendency to destroy all tradition or render it unconscious could interrupt the normal process of development. But what he sees is that what Jung is predicting is inevitable, is the coming of the self. That's what we would call the recognition that we are souls. This coming of the self is going to require turning loose of all of these things that are so destructive and to individuals and relationships and families and nations, and we're seeing this played out with the extremes. And here's the way Casey talks about them. I've been studying for years these Casey readings on world affairs. There cannot be one measuring stick for the laborer in the field and the man behind the counter, and another for the man behind the money changers. All are equal under the law, but not the material law, not only the material law, but the spiritual law, and his laws, his will not come to naught. Though there may come periods when there will be great stress as brother rises against brother or group or sect against race, yet the leveling must come. And only those who set their ideal in Him and practice it in their dealings with their fellow man may expect to survive the wrath of the Lord. So there's coming a leveling. It's not going to be without difficulties. And what we're invited to do is to set our ideal in Him and practice it in our dealing with our fellow man. Now, another that's related to this. Unless those in position give their means, their wealth, their education, their position, unless these do not take these changes into consideration, there must be a leveling. For unless these are considered, eventually there will be a revelation in this country, and there will be a dividing of the sections, one against another. For the leveling and the leveling means the manners to which men resort when there is plenty in some and lack of sustenance in the life of others. They are the manners in which such things as crime, riots, and every nature of disturbance arise. In that those who are in authority are not considering every level phase of human activity in their considerations. So there's a leveling coming. We're seeing these challenges, and we need to have an awareness. Now, Edinger, who wrote this book on Archetype of the Apocalypse, says if it'll be eased if we understand what's happening. And so what we want to understand is that these changes must come. We see all of these inequities and imbalances, and we must be faithful and be consistent with our faith through this, knowing that the whole world is in His hand. Remember the Logos logo, the globe in the hand. Remember and sing the song. He's got the whole world in His hand. And now, Anne has some things she wants to share with you about a field of her expertise on death and dying and communication with the spirit plane.
Yet. I wanted to talk to you today about death and dying. Anyone watching the news the last few months has been filled with information about people being killed and arrested and dying, all kinds of things. And it's really made me do a lot of thinking about life and death, and because we've been home so much, we have done an awful lot of reading. I mentioned to you before that we were reading the Lemurian books about the great civilization of Lemuria that sank beneath the ocean in thousands of years ago, and how that entire civilization had sent colonies to other places. And so there is information about Lemuria in almost every country in the world, from India, China, and all. And then they found a number of plates in clay pits in Mexico with the history of Lemuria on them that hadn't been destroyed because they were made out of clay. And this civilization had as many as 60 million people that were lost overnight in Lemuria, overnight. And it sank with the upheavals there. And if you want to, you can read a great deal of information about Lemuria and Atlantis, and Edgar Cayce on Atlantis. And then Rudolf Steiner wrote a number of books about Atlantis and Lemuria, and they're excellent. And it talks about this great civilization. They had machines that flew through the air. They had all kinds of technology that was lost with the sinking. And they said that many, many decades after the sinking of Lemuria and after the sinking of Atlantis, that the oceans could not be traveled. They were so thick with mud and residue from the sinking of these two great continents. So this history, the thing I love about it, is it shows you that there was a civilization so advanced that during a time of cataclysmic upheaval, it was completely destroyed, and the only thing that tells us for sure that it was once there are all the records, historical records of India, China, Japan, all these countries that wrote about this land and the people that came and colonized from that land. So this has been wonderful reading for us, and there are a lot of other good books about Lemuria. But a man named Jack Churchward wrote a great number of books about Lemuria. So if you want some really fascinating reading that will change how you think about everything, pick up anything you can about Lemuria by Jack Churchward. It's the most accurate. And there's a writer named Laplanche, I think that's how you pronounce his name, that also wrote about it. So there is a lot of information, and just Google it and go online and you'll find that. Because we've been so housebound for the last few months, we have done a tremendous amount of reading. Day and night, rather than as much TV, we read everything that we can. And I was rereading Herb's book, the Edgar Cayce Primer, which, by the way, he wouldn't brag and say that, but it is a bestseller. It's sold over 500,000 copies. And there are chapters in here on everything from healing to meditation to just goes on and on. This is a really good book, and even if I didn't know the author, I would say read this book. This is a good book for right now that will tell you all about dreams and things like that. And as you know, Herb is working currently on a manuscript about dreams. He just finished The Psychology of the Soul, which the press just told him today that he'll be getting copies very shortly. So look for that on Amazon and other bookstores, A Psychology of the Soul by Herb Puryear. Another book that I wanted to tell you that I've really been reading and studying during this time. Many of you remember a woman who worked for ARE and wrote a number of books called Elsie Sechrist, and she wrote a book called Death Does Not Part Us. Death Does Not Part Us. And it's episodes that confirm Edgar Cayce's view of the afterlife. And I had read it, I think, parts of it at least, years ago, and it is really helpful if you want to try to understand death and what happens when you die and how you can continue communicating after you pass. I'm going to give you just a little hint about something I'm going to talk about in a few weeks. I've been having these amazing experiences every night with Jesus. I meet him in a healing garden. We talk. I take friends in with me. He does healings on them. But I had an amazing thing happen the other night that said, this is not your imagination. You are actually creating this experience with Jesus. So I'll talk about that some other time, because it ties in with all of this about life after death and everything else and the promises of Jesus. I have never enjoyed the Cayce material more than since this pandemic, and reading things that give me a sense of hope that we've gone through these awful times in Lemuria, Atlantis, many other places. We have survived and we've continued, and some of the stories will give you insights about how to cope with this time, even though some of these things happened so many thousands of years ago. The way things were handled, the way things were done, gives us an idea of how we can cope with it better. I also have read a couple of other books that have really meant a great deal to me, and if you can get a copy of this book, Knocking on Heaven's Door. Knocking on Heaven's Door by Katie Butler. I think she may have been featured on Oprah also, and this is a New York Times best-selling book. And the exciting thing about it is not, I thought it was a book about just life after death. It's not. It's the way to have a gentle and good death. And there really are such things. If we go into the time when we're about to make the transition with fear and anxiety, we're going to have a totally different experience than if we go into it knowing that it's simply walking through God's other door, as Edgar Cayce said. When we die, we just simply walk through God's other door. We take off our outer clothing, so to speak, or our temple or our earth suit, whatever you want to call it, and we walk through that door and we begin a new adventure. It's nothing to be afraid about. And I know many of you have had experiences with loved ones that have died, and I certainly have. I wrote Stephen Lives about the death of my son and my communications with him after he died. And even to this day, we are still communicating. I talk to him almost every day. And he gives me information about things that are happening and how to deal with it better and how to stay calm through all this that we're seeing. As we see these murders really on TV of black men with their backs turned, shot in the back, all those kind of things. We can really get bitter, we can get confused, or we can get stressed because we don't know what's going on. And sometimes books such as this, Knocking on Heaven's Door, about how to embrace death in a different way and not to be frightened of it. For instance, there's something in this book that I had never, maybe many of you had, I had never read before. It says that with the new methods we have medically to prolong life, because we can now save lives that we never could before, that with that comes some warnings, because you may prolong life by having stents or certain kinds of surgery, and you live another 5 years, but you have dementia for the rest of your life because of this medical treatment that you have. So they talk about, Katie Butler talks about how you can choose perhaps not to have a treatment, which would shorten your life for a little bit, but you would not, you would be clear of mind, you would not be suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's during that time, and how to prepare for exits like that. I found this was not an enjoyable book, but one of the most helpful books that I have read. Very, very good book. And another one, I am obsessed with Chicken Soup for the Soul books. We have maybe 50, 75 of them. I don't have all of them for sure. They've written several hundred. This is called Touched by an Angel. I read this last night while I was having a session on the Beamer, and I've been reading it as much as I could find some time to do that. And these are stories of people that have had these wonderful paranormal spiritual experiences with loved ones who've died or who've been rescued in a car that went over a cliff and an angel came and lifted them up. Just story after story. I have cried every time I read this. It's just an absolutely wonderful book. So I guess my point is that there's so much help and comfort that we can receive by reading books that lift our spirits, by reading books that inform us about things like, I never really had thought about having a gentle death. I just figured I was going to die and it would be okay, and I knew a few things to do to prepare for it. But since I have been reading Death Does Not Part Us and some other things, I've really been trying to understand, not only from the Bible, but also from the Casey books and others, to understand death and life after death more fully. Because I think that if you can lose your fear of death, I don't think that. I really know that. I believe that if you can lose your fear of death, you can have such a different ending to this incarnation, such a glorious experience by embracing death, by considering it a grand or great adventure. Now, as I say that is not as easy as it sounds, because when you have someone you really love that dies, you hurt. Even the most advanced spiritual people are going to hurt when someone dies. That is absolutely normal. It's not so much that you think you may never see them again, although there is that fear too, but it's that you miss their presence and talking to them and being able to share with them and listen to their feedback and all. So there's that void that happens. But there is a beauty in understanding death, accepting of it, a way to... I wish that I were this enlightened. I'm not. I wish that when somebody died, I would say, oh, this is fantastic. They're heading on a new adventure. It's going to be wonderful. I wish that I were that enlightened. But when somebody that I love dies, I grieve. I hurt. I think about them. I'm sad they're gone. I know all the stuff that I should be thinking, but I just miss them. And there's a little quote. I've used it before here. We don't cry for our loved ones who die. We cry for ourselves because we miss them. So we cry for ourselves. So they're in a better place. They're doing good. We cry for ourselves because we miss them. And death should be considered as joyful as birth, because it really is a birth to your next adventure. So perhaps that's what we should do. Say, death, birth to a new adventure. Death is a birth to a new adventure, and celebrate it that way, because The scriptures tell us that Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration talked to dead people. He talked to Moses and Elijah. They were dead. They talked to him. He interacted with them. And the scriptures say the things Jesus did, we can do, and greater things than these. And I believe that. And so I believe we can talk to the dead. I have talked to my son who died for years, and not only have I talked to him, but he has given me information that I could check out and prove that it was him and not just say imagining. Although imagination is creative, so I maybe shouldn't quite say it that way because it's not always imagination. Sometimes our creativity is happening. In understanding life after death, we have to be willing first to say, do I really believe in life after death? Do I really believe the dead can talk with us? Because if you have doubt that it can happen, it will be more difficult for you. But if you believe that it can happen, even if you have not personally experienced, but if you keep trying and working with trying to make that bridge between dimensions and will work at it steadily, it really can happen. One of the, anybody that writes gets book reviews, and some of them are wonderful and some of them are really bad. And I've gotten some really good ones and I've gotten some really bad ones. And the thing that amazes me is somebody said, I can't believe anybody that's dead can talk in sentences from the other side. Well, I don't think I did either, but they can. And we can learn to listen to them. We can learn to ask them questions and to try to use that information as much as possible. So some of the books that I've recommended, especially Death Does Not Part Us by Elsie Sechrist, would be a wonderful one to read during this time, and Touched by an Angel, and to know that those that have passed on want to communicate with us just as much as we want to communicate with them. So my words to you are, don't doubt, trust that those who have passed on do want to communicate with you. They love you just like they did when they were physically in body, and take an effort, make an effort to communicate with them. Keep a journal, write down what you get, and I believe with all my heart you will get information that will confirm to you that this is not your imagination. You are fully communicating with those you love on the other side. God bless you, good luck, and be safe. I guess that's what I wanted to say, be safe.
Operator, give me information, give me long distance, long distance, give me heaven. Operator, information, give me Jesus on the line. Operator, information, wanna talk to a friend of mine. Prayer is the number, faith is the exchange, heaven is the street, and Jesus is his name. Operator, information, please give me Jesus on the line. Operator, information, tell me why, tell me why. Operator, information, tell me what number to try. My mama called this number when I was very small. Every time she called it, he'd always take the call. Operator, information, give me Jesus on the line. Operator, Operator, information, please hurry if you can. Operator, information, connect me to the man. Don't worry, not the on